There are many Excel functions that include row in their names. Some, like row and rows, have been around for a while, whereas other functions such as TOROW, BYROW, WRAPROWS, and CHOOSEROWS are relatively new, often causing confusion because of their name, although they have distinct actions. I am Nabil Murad. In this tutorial, I will clarify these functions with straightforward examples and demonstrate how to apply them in real-world scenarios. So let's dive in. The row function returns the number of the row. I can use it as an argumentless function, so I can type equal row, open bracket, close bracket, and when I hit enter, I'm getting the row number. I can also use it with a cell reference, so if I type equal row and then I hit tab, I type any cell reference, A12 for instance, I close the bracket and hit enter, and I'm getting row number 12. I can use the row function with a range of cells, and it will spill to the adjacent cells. So if I type equal row and then I open bracket and I select any range, let it be this range, I close the bracket and hit enter, and I get sequential numbers from 4 to 13. I can also use the row function only with numbers. So if I type equal row, I open bracket and I type, let's say, from 3 to 12. I close the bracket and hit enter, and I get sequential numbers from 3 to 12. Let's use the row function in a real work situation. There is a function called the char function that takes a number and returns a character. The char function for numbers 65 to 90 returns the alphabet from A to Z in uppercase. So what if I use the row function with the char function? So I type equal char and then I hit tab because I want to start at 65. Then I'll be typing 64 plus the row function. I type row. I want from 1 to 26. I close the bracket twice, and when I hit enter, I get the alphabet from A to Z in uppercase. I can also use the row function with the small or the large function. I have a column that shows an amount in column A, and I want to extract the smallest 3 or 4 or 5 amounts. Then I create a small function equal small, and then I hit tab. I select the range where I have the amounts, and then I type a comma. What's the K? I want the smallest 3 numbers. Then I use the row function at this position. I type row. I open bracket 1:3. I close the bracket twice. When I hit enter, I'm getting the smallest 3 amounts. What if I want the largest? I put my function in the edit mode, and instead of small, I replace it with large. I hit enter and I get the 3 largest amounts. I can also use the row function to extract the last value in a range. So if I have a range like the range in column F and G where I have a month from January to December, and I have some values whether numbers or text, and I have lots of blanks. I want the last value in column G. Then I'm going to use an if function equal if, and I hit tab. I look at the range from G5 to G16 and I say if it is not blank, if it is not double quote, comma, return the row number. Then I type row, and because I have 12 months, I type 1:12. I close the bracket twice and then I hit enter. So I'm getting the row number whenever I have a value, otherwise I get a false. But I only want the row number of the last value. I put it in the edit mode and I wrap it in a max function. I type max, I open bracket, I close the bracket at the end. Where I hit enter, I'm getting the row number of the last value. But I don't want just the row number, I want the real value. Then I put it in the edit mode one last time, and I want to put it in an index function. I type index, I hit tab. I want index of this range in column G from G5 to G16. I type a comma. What's the row number from which you need a return value? That will be the bunch of max, if, and row function. I close the bracket and hit enter. I'm getting 28. So what if I type another value? Let's say I type my name. When I hit enter, I'm getting my name. What if I delete these last two values? Then it's returning the last value in the range. I can also use the row function with conditional formatting. I have a list, and in this list I want to add alternating colors for the rows. Then I select the entire list, and then on the home tab of the ribbon I click on conditional formatting, new rule. I want to use a formula. I type equal. If the row number is even, please add the color. So I type is even, open bracket, I type row, open bracket, close bracket, and I close the bracket for the is even function. What formatting do you want? I click on format, I click on the fill tab, and I select a light blue fill color. I hit OK and another OK, and I would have added alternating colors to the rows. The next function is the rows function, and it returns the number of rows you have in a range. It cannot be used as an argumentless function. So if I type equal rows, I hit tab. If I close the bracket, unlike the row function, I'll be getting an error. But I can use the rows function with a cell reference. So if I click on any cell, let it be cell B15, I hit enter, then I'm getting 1 because one single cell is selected. I can also use the rows function with a range. So if I type equal rows and then I hit tab, I select a range, any range I want from B8 to B15, I hit enter, and it says in this range you have 8 rows. Then the rows function always returns a single value. I can also use the rows function with numbers only, without a complete set reference. So if I type equal rows and then I hit tab, how many rows I have between 3 and 18, I close the bracket, and when I hit enter, I get the result. I have 16 rows. There is a very common use of the rows function to return an incremental column of rows. So here I have a list which shows a name, an address, a city, a state, and an amount. In cell K1, I created a drop list from which I can select any name. And I want, when I select a name, I extract all the information for that name. And I'm going to use a VLOOKUP function for doing this. In cell K2, I type equal VLOOKUP, and then I hit tab. What's your lookup value? Whatever comes from the drop list, and I lock it by hitting F4. I type a comma, and the next argument, what's your table array? It will be the entire list, and I want to lock it because I intend to copy. I hit F4, and then I type a comma, and here comes the important argument. To extract the address I need 2, for the city I need 3, 4, and 5. And that's the perfect job of the rows function. I'll be typing rows, and then I hit tab. Rows of what? I want to start with 2, then I select any 2 cells on top of each other. I close the bracket for the rows function, but before moving to the next argument, I want to lock the first cell reference. I put my blinking cursor in the first cell reference, and I hit F4 to lock it, and then finally, comma 0 for the range lookup for an exact match. I close the bracket and hit enter, and I'm getting the address corresponding to the selected name. Now I can copy my function down, and I would have extracted an entire record thanks to the rows function. The next function is the BYROW function. This is a relatively new function. I have a list which shows a manager name and the sales for each manager in each quarter. The BYROW function will be performing a calculation on each row of an array. It can be a simple calculation, and in this case I just type equal BYROW. I hit tab. What's your array? My array will be this one, and then I type a comma, and then what would you like to do row by row? We have a bunch of functions from which I can select. I'll go with the sum function. I close the bracket and hit enter, and I'm getting the sum of sales row by row. But if I have a more complex situation, let's say for each one of the managers, I want to compare the total sales to the sales goal in cell B1. If the employee hits the sales goal, we need to give a commission of 2%. This requires a little bit more doing. I'll be deleting my previous BYROW function, and now I want to know who is eligible to get the commission and how much will be the amount of that commission. I type equal BYROW, and the BYROW function is a lambda helper function. We used it in the previous example in its simplest form. But now in this example, I need to use a lambda function. I select my array where I want to perform a calculation row by row. I type a comma, and here I type a lambda function. I open bracket, and then I type a parameter. I can call it whatever I want. I'm going to call it x. X represents each row in the range from B15 to E19. What would you like to do with each row? I type a comma, and here comes the function, the calculation. I want to compare the total sales, the sum of x, to the amount in cell B1. Then I type if, open bracket, the sum of x is greater than or equal to cell B1. I type a comma. In this case, I want to multiply the sum of x by 2%. I type sum of x multiplied by cell E1. I close the bracket for the sum function. I close the bracket for the if function, for the lambda function, and for the BYROW function. When I hit enter, then if the employee does not hit the sales goal, I get a false. Otherwise, I get the commission amount. In a more advanced scenario, you might want to extract a list showing the employee name and the commission amount by excluding those who didn't get the commission. To do that, I'm going to copy my function, the BYROW function that I created, Control C, and I start over again by creating a let function. In cell I5, I type equal let, and then I hit tab. The let function allows me to create variables and use these variables in calculations. I will call my first variable A. I type a comma, and the value of A will be the names of the different managers. I then type comma. I hit Ctrl-Shift-U to expand the formula bar, and then I want to move to the next line. I hit Alt-Enter, and my second variable will be called B, and that will refer to the BYROW function. So I type B, comma, and I paste my BYROW function. I then type a comma, and the next variable, which is the one that will put A and B side by side, I hit Alt-Enter, I'll call it C, and for this one, I'll be using an hstack function. I type hstack, and then I hit tab. What would you like to stack? I want the variable A, comma, the variable B, and I close the bracket. I then type a comma and hit Alt-Enter to move to the last line. I don't want all the employee names. I just want the employee names where I have a commission in the variable B. Then I use a filter function to do that. I type filter. I hit tab. What would you like to filter? I want to filter C, comma, if B is a number. Then I type is number. I hit tab. B. I close the bracket for the is number, for the filter, and for the let function. Where I hit enter, I get exactly what I want. The list of employees receiving a commission and the amount for the commission. The next function is the TOROW function. The TOROW function takes an array and converts it into a single row. Let's see how it works. In this example, I have an array which shows a city, a state, and a total, and I want to convert it into a single row. Then I type equal TOROW, and then I hit tab. Where is your array? I select this entire range. I can close the bracket at this point, but let's explore the remaining arguments. I type a comma. Here it asks me what would you like to ignore, the blanks, the arrows, and so on. I type another comma. The default is to select row by row, but if you want to go column by column, that's also an option. I'm going to omit these arguments. I type a backspace, and then I close the bracket. I hit enter, and I get a single row. If you want to convert this single row back to an array, that's the perfect job of the next function, WRAPROWS. So if I select this function, I put it in the edit mode, I click before the TOROW and I type WRAPROWS. I hit tab. This is my vector. I click at the end and I type a comma. What's the wrap count, which means how many columns you want. And because we have an equivalent function, the WRAPCOLS, which does exactly the opposite, The wrap count means how many rows you want. Here I'm using WRAPROWS, how many columns I want. I want 3 columns. I type 3. There is another argument, pad width. I'm not going to use it in this example. I close the bracket, I hit enter, and I was able to convert it back into an array of 3 columns. Let's see a real work example where I need to use the WRAPROWS function. In this worksheet, I have a list of employee names. And what I would like to do for a certain project is to create random groups of employees. And these groups are created randomly for a specific project. But I want to be able to get the groups in columns or in rows. Then I created these option buttons. When I click on in rows, I'm getting the random groups in rows. If I select in columns, I'm getting them in columns. I can change the number of groups I'm getting. I can get 4 groups, I can get 6 groups, and look at that. When I divide the number of employees by 4, I have 2 blanks. That's the pad width argument. And if I change back to 5, then I'm getting 5 groups of employees. I created a label dynamically that shows how many groups I have. Let's build this project from scratch. In the next worksheet, I have the same list of employees or students, whatever, and I created the 2 option buttons in columns and in rows. These 2 option buttons return a number either 1 or 2 in cell G2. So if I select in rows, I get 2. If I select in columns, I get 1. I also created the drop list that I'll be using for specifying how many random groups I want. And let's start in cell D5 creating my function. The first step is to sort the list of students or employees randomly. Then I'll be using a sort by function equals sort by, and then I hit tab. What would you like to sort? I select the list of names, shift control down arrow control backspace. I have 50 names. Then I want to sort them randomly by using a randArray function. I type randArray and I hit tab. I'll be typing 50 because I have 50 names. I close the bracket twice. When I hit enter, I get the list randomized. If I hit F9, I get a different order. But I want this list of randomized names divided into 5 columns. 5 is the number returned by the drop list. Then I'm going to wrap my sort by function in a WRAPROWS function. I put it in the edit mode. I click at the beginning and I type WRAPROWS and I hit tab. The vector will be the sort by and the randArray function. I click at the end, I type a comma. What about the wrap count? It will be whatever the drop list will be returning. I click on my drop list F2. I then type a comma, and here the last argument is important. What would you like to add if we don't get a value? What would you like to pad with? Then I'll be typing double quote, and I close the bracket. When I hit enter, then I'm getting 5 groups in 5 columns of randomized names. I want to add a label at the top. Then I put my function in the edit mode and I'll be using a VStack function. I hit F2 and I wrap all these functions in a VStack function. I type VStack and then I hit tab. What would you like to put on top of the names? I'll be typing in double quotation character G and a space, and I close the double quotation. I want a number, G1, G2, G3. So I use the joining operator of Excel Shift 7 on your keyboard, the and symbol, and I use a sequence function. I hit the tab for the sequence. Would you like it in rows? No, I want it in columns. Then I type a comma to skip the rows argument, and for the columns, I select the number of columns returned by the drop list, and I close the bracket for the sequence function, and then I type a comma. The G and the sequence, that's the first array, and the WRAPROWS sort by and randArray, that's the second array. Then I want to close the bracket at the end, and I hit enter, and I'm getting exactly what I'm looking for. If I select a different number of columns, I click on the drop list and I select 4, then I'm getting the blanks and the column header updates. Let's go back to 5. How can I change the functionality from columns to rows? I'm going to copy my function, Control C, I hit escape, and I'm going to delete my function. The option buttons control the number returned in cell G2. If in G2 I have 1, that means in columns is selected, then I want the same function I created already. However, if I select in rows, I'm getting 2 in cell G2, then I want the same function with little modifications to return the result in rows. How can I do that? In cell D5, I use a switch function, equal switch. The switch function will look at cell G2, and then I type a comma. If the value in G2 is 1, I type a comma, then I use the function I already created, then I paste it. I click at the end, and if the value in G2 is 2, I type comma 2. Then in this case, what do you want? I type a comma, I hit Alt-Enter to move to the next line, and I'm going to paste the same function one more time and make 3 modifications, Ctrl-V. What are the 3 modifications you want to make? Instead of VStack, I use an HStack function. For the sequence function, I don't want it in columns, I want it in rows, then I delete the comma. And instead of using a WRAPROWS function, I'm going to use a WRAPCOLS function. I close the bracket for the switch function, and let's test. I hit enter, and I'm getting the result in columns because I'm selecting in columns from the options button. If I switch to in rows, then I'm getting the result in rows. If I select a different number, let's say 4, then I'm getting 4 rows. If I switch to columns, I'm getting 4 columns, and I finish creating my project. In my original project, I have some conditional formatting applied as well. The last function I want to show you is the CHOOSEROWS functions. And the name is very clear. It does what it says. It returns the rows you choose. In this table, I have a buyer, a city, a state, and an amount. I would like to return the names of the buyers having the highest 3 or 4 or 5 amounts according to the number selected in cell G1. Then I'm going first to sort this table following the amount. I use a sort by function to do that, equal sort by, and then I hit tab. I select the table by hovering over the upper left corner. The name of the table is sales. I type a comma, and I want to sort by the amount column. I hover over the amount column and select it, and then I close the bracket and hit enter. I get the same table sorted in an ascending order. I put my function in the edit mode, and then for the sort by function, I can type a comma and sort in a descending order by typing -1 as a last argument. When I hit enter, then I'm getting the sort in a descending order. Would you like to return all the records or just the first 3 values? Then I'm going to use the CHOOSEROWS function to do that. I put my function in the edit mode and I wrap it in a CHOOSEROWS function. I click at the beginning and I type CHOOSEROWS and I hit tab. I click at the end, I type a comma, and here it asks me, what are the row numbers? I can type 1, 2, 3, but I want to make it dynamic, then I'll be using a sequence function for this. Sequence of what? Sequence of whatever I have in cell J1. I close the bracket for the sequence function, I close the bracket for the CHOOSEROWS function. When I hit enter, I'm getting the top 3 values, the highest 3 amounts. But I don't want all the columns, I just want the buyer name and the amount, and that's the perfect job of the CHOOSECOLS function. I put my function in the edit mode and I wrap my functions in a CHOOSECOLS function. How many columns you want? I click at the end. I want the buyer name and the amount, which is column 1 and column 4. I type 1, 4. I close the bracket for the CHOOSECOLS function. I hit enter and I get exactly what I was looking for. In this tutorial, I showed you examples of 6 functions having the word row in their name. There is another set of 6 functions having the word col in their names. We explored some of them: the column function, the columns function, TOCOL, BYCOL, WRAPCOLS, and CHOOSECOLS. The concept is exactly the same, but it works on columns, not on rows. If you found value in this tutorial, give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe to my channel to be notified when new tutorials are released. The best is yet to come. Thanks for watching and see you next time.